So basically my question was, is he really going to be released? If there's something fishy about this agreement. Julian Assange is somebody not related to me, but it's somebody I am interested in. So he is signified by Mercury. Mercury is at 16 degrees of Cancer, and he is inside his second house cusp, which is meaningful because he is in the process of striking a plea deal with the American judicial system. He is in the house of his lawyer, his legal assistants. So he is striking a plea deal and he is in the hands of his legal team. We have a star here. What's the star? Aldebaran. Something new is coming to him. And that's exactly what happened, right? What else do we see here? We see Venus is inside his second cusp. So Venus has an influence in his legal team, and so does the Sun. What's the next thing that happens to Mercury? And is that next thing a good thing or not? But we don't know what Saturn is. Whatever it is, it's good and bad. It's good because it's a trine, but it's good in what way? It means that it's not going to be something that will have a lot of resistance. It's going to happen smoothly. What's bad about this? Technically, I'm asking about technique. You have to look at the chart and look at the factors that you consider when analyzing an aspect. So the first thing is that it's a trine. Mercury is in the detriment of Saturn. So Mercury doesn't want Saturn at all, but that's what it's getting. Yeah, it's an applying aspect. So whether Mercury likes or doesn't like Saturn, it's going to get it, okay? So now we're going to look at the context and see what this means, because he must have gotten it. He's out of jail, he's in Australia, and he met this Saturn. What could it be? We'll see in a minute. And Saturn is in the detriment and fall of Mercury, so it's a double negative reception, okay? So this Saturn is really bad for Mercury in some way. But what in this situation could be so damaging to him and he could hate so much? He's fighting with the American judicial system. So normally we would have to look at house 10 for the judicial system, right? They made a plea deal, right? The moon made a deal with the government to release him. They accepted it. But now a judge would ask him a few questions, depending on his answers. She would release him or not. The ruler of the next sign of house 10 will be the ruler of the judicial system. So Venus is in the house of his legal assistants. So if we wanted to know if the judge will be favorable to what his legal team is asking, would be favorable or unfavorable. Here it would be favorable because Venus is ruled by the moon. So whatever the moon is asking, Venus will say, okay, I'll give it to you. Okay, that's what receptions say. So here the judge will be favorable. We can also see that Venus is combust. So applying basic principles, we know that the Sun has a lot of power over Venus. What could the Sun mean? As stated by Julian Assange's attorneys, the Australian government played an important role in this. High-ranking officials from Australia were part of the negotiation, so there was an influence from a foreign country. House 4 is an important house here. What does house 4 mean in legal matters? So this is the verdict. This is the end of the matter. It's whatever the judge decides, which was, okay, you don't need to go to prison anymore. You can go to Australia. Bye. But you have to do something for me before you can do that. And he did, and he went to Australia. So based on what I just told you, and the fact that Jupiter is in the sign of Mercury and is in his house, right? Less than 5 degrees here. Is Jupiter good for him or not? Jupiter is in the sign of Mercury. Receptions, they will do good things to Mercury. So the verdict of this whole story favors him, is something that will benefit him. But remember, he had to do something in order to get this verdict. What is it that he had to do in order to get this verdict? He had to give something to the prosecutors. It didn't come for free. He had to agree to something. What did he agree to? He had to plead guilty, right? He wasn't acquitted from his crimes, okay? He had to say, oh yeah, I commit this crime. Now please let me go. And that's what they did. What in the chart tells us that he had to plead guilty, which is to do something he didn't want to do because he doesn't believe he committed a crime, but the judicial system gave him the option. If you accept you're guilty, you can go. If you don't, you will not go. So what in the chart shows us that he pleaded guilty and how he felt about it, what his relationship to this plea is. There's one testimony in the chart that describes that perfectly. Where is the plea deal in the chart? We already talked about it. It was the first thing we talked about when we started looking at the chart. It's clear both as a natural ruler and by house location. What was the first thing we analyzed when we started? We looked at the next aspect. That means that the first thing that's going to happen after this chart is this aspect. So what was the first thing he had to do in order to get this verdict? He had to plead guilty. This shows him pleading guilty. What does Saturn rule? He rules rules, he rules obstructions, he rules limits, he rules things that you have to do, whether you like or not. So it's a very Saturnine thing he had to do. This is Saturn. There is no negotiation. You have to take this Saturn. So the eloquence of the natural symbolism is very pertinent. But even if it wasn't Saturn, Saturn is inside this cusp. So remember, a planet in a house influences that house. Okay? So what does it mean here? This is the house of his verdict. Okay? So Saturn influences the verdict. How does it influence the verdict? Well, he has to plead guilty, and then he gets his verdict. How do we know this plead guilty? Well, first, he didn't want to plead guilty. He denied it many times before, because this has been going on for months, since last year. And he said, I'm not going to plead guilty because I'm not guilty. That was his position. But now he had to, otherwise he wouldn't be free. He decided to plead guilty. That's why he's in the detriment of Saturn. He didn't want to do it. But it's a trine. He did it. A trine with negative reception, you do something you don't want to do, but without much resistance. And if you have a square with positive reception, you do something that you want to do, but it's difficult to do it. Okay? So those things happen a lot in HORARY. And here's the case of the farmer, right? He did something he didn't want, which is, I'm going to get Saturn, but I'm going to do it. I'm able to do it. There will be no resistance. And the fact that Saturn is in the detriment and fall of Mercury means that this plea deal goes against everything that he fought for, right? His identity is connected to that, basically. So this plea deal goes against him as a person, and that basically describes the situation. But the main thing is the fact that there is a negative mutual reception between them, and the chart perfectly describes exactly what happened. Nothing that I said here is outside of the known context, but everything is clearly delineated.